No, thanks for having me.
I feel like we've done 4 or 5 podcasts, and then I realize you've only been on the show once.
Is it once? I thought it was twice.
Maybe
I think it was twice.
No, you're right. Yeah, I think it has been twice. But it does feel like I don't know, we've talked a lot off the microphone. So,
which is like the opposite I have with most people. I feel like I only get to see them during podcasts, and it's the only time we talk for like 3 hours in a row.
Your entire relationship with somebody is based on recording podcasts, which is increasingly my relationship with my wife. You know?
Well, that's what I liked about the one that you did with your dad. I was like, I've never had that conversation with my dad, because you never would. You would do it.
You never do it. It's something that we probably think a lot about. Like, oh, when's that day going to come? And I'm going to sit down. I'm going to, we're going to have a scotch and talk about your life. And that moment never really arises. And it had occurred to me that I wanted to do that, and there's something about putting a microphone in front of somebody that creates a formality and a structure that kind of allows that to transpire, because it forces the person to actually think about what they're going to say, with the idea that I would probably never share it. Yeah. But then when he wrote the book, then it was like, okay, we can do this.
Yeah.
And I appreciate all the support and the help that you've lent to him in his book. It's super meaningful.
I told you I would have done it anyway, because I thought it was a really good book, and I thought it was important.
Yeah. It's funny you told me the story of meeting my dad when he showed up at one of your book signing things, and he just like rolled right up to you right before you were supposed to speak, right?
I don't know if it was right before or right after, but it was I remember we texted about it, you and I. I recognize some of my dad in your dad. And it was funny.
Yeah. Well, the occasion of this podcast is your new book, which we're going to get into in a minute, which I loved. I think it's fantastic. This is like right in my wheelhouse. Like, I just love it. But before we get into that, like, I wanted to spend at least a couple minutes talking about this other part of what you do. I mean, you're in LA because you were down speaking with the Rams, right? And this is something that you've been doing more and more of. It seems like every week you're at another major league sports franchise.
Well, this is an unusual set of 2 weeks, but yes, last week I was with the Browns, and I got to speak to the team, and I spent a couple of days with them. That was very cool. I was most excited. They let me swim in the team lap pool. Yeah. Wow. And so it's at field level, so you can watch you're basically looking at the ankles of the players going through walkthroughs in practice as you're swimming. Right. So and they only let me use the pool when the players were practicing, because then they wouldn't be there. So that was really cool. And then I happened to know the GM of the Rams, and he invited me out. And so I spoke to the coaches yesterday and today. And
what's that like? Like, when you're talking to do you talk to the players as well, or is it mainly
for the Rams? I didn't. I've spoken to different teams like it before. It's a very weird audience. The weirdest audience was, so in March, I spoke at the NFL owners meeting, which was probably the most unusual audience that I'll ever speak to. I mean, aside from maybe addressing the UN, like, when would you have
this aggregation of billionaires?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a minimum of 32 billionaires, and then it was all the head coaches and all of the team presidents and all of the GMs. And so it's just a surreal audience. It's like, it's humbling to be there, but then you're just like, I think what strikes me is like, I'm talking to these people about ancient philosophy. This is like, I think that's so cool, and it's also so absurd at the same time.
Well, I mean, certainly when you sat down to write these books, this series of books, you could not have predicted or imagined that it would have been embraced in this sort of subculture to the extent that it has.
I mean, it would have been delusional is the only word, but it does make sense. Like, there's a bunch of Stoics who are athletes. I think what I try to do in the books is apply ancient wisdom to life in a practical way. And I think I would like to think I'm not just like, hey, here's how you get through the day, but I want to say, like, hey, what have the really smart people throughout history figured out about being elite at whatever you do, whether that's being elite as a human being or a parent or, an athlete or a leader or whatever. But it's just really cool. I like talking to all different audiences, but it's certainly much more interesting to address a sports team that you've watched on television that is sort of bumping up against the limits of like human performance,
right?
Than it is to talk to an insurance company. Not that I don't like talking to the insurance company, but there's a purity to sports that I'm interested in because, like when you, I don't know, just all the cliches that if a normal person said, you'd be like, that's lame. An athlete can say in a locker room after a game, and it has this
sounds
significant,
inspirational, yeah.
But it is like they really mean it. They're not like bullshitting, you know, like they really are. They really do speak in these sort of like cliches and epigrams because it's. And I talk a little bit about this in the book, but you know, Yogi Berra had that line like it's impossible to think and hit at the same time.
Right.
So at sports, because your body's doing most of the work, you have to simplify the mental. It's like you have to simmer the sauce down to its absolute essence. And so it's just so simple and straightforward, and there's no like irony or bullshit or, you know, posturing in sports. It's just there.
Well, I think there's a difference between a group of executives who all want to perform, but fundamentally it's a job, right? And that's different from an athlete. It's their job as well, but the level of receptivity to finding that extra edge to game performance, I think, is probably much more heightened in that community.
Yeah, and you know, hearing you say that, I would say the only other group where you're like, these are all the best people in the world at what they do, and they're on the same team would be like the military. Like there would never be, there's no audience. There's no like, hey, these are the 30 best writers in the world, and somehow they're on the same team, sitting in the same room, and you can address them. Do you know what I mean? Because everything else is like one-on-one combat. Like the rest of the world, like my books have spread through sports because like a guy at the thing I talked to today, it was telling me he'd read the book, and I said, how did you hear about it? And he told him, this is not like a high-level guy. This is just a guy. He's like, oh, the GM of this other NFL team told me I should read it.
Right.
The CEO of Google does not recommend books to anyone, let alone like the people at rival companies. And so there's just it's just a unique thing where you're like, all these people are like, on the same team trying to get better together. There's just a coolness that there's no other audience where you get to do that.
So as somebody who wrote a book called Ego is the Enemy, I mean, that's got to be a challenge to keep your ego in check when somebody says something like that to you. Yeah. You know, because that's heavy, man.
Yeah. I mean, what I try to remind myself is none of these people care. Like they're like, you're just like, you're talking to the players and they're just like, if he gives me something I can use, I'll use him, and then I'll immediately forget who he is. Like,
and next week somebody else is coming in.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also good to just remind yourself of like success in our field is like the rookie minimum contract in the NFL.
Right.
Do you know what like you're just like, oh, it's humbling just to be. You're like, I'm in your world, but I'm not of your world.
Right.
So that's what I try to focus on when I'm there.
What is the most surreal experience that you've had kind of navigating that terrain? That's
a good question. I mean, it's like you'll get recognized, like so every once in a while get recognized, like and it's like, this is supposed to be going the other direction. You know what I mean? Like, that's weird. I don't know. I think, The weirdest thing about the sports stuff is every once in a while I'll just get like an email from a head coach or a GM or something, and you're just like, even at that level, these are just normal people reading books and then shooting a note to the author because they like them. Right. Like it's still pretty normal. That's the surreal experience. You just wake up and you're like, oh, what is that? Is that from who I think that is from? Like, and I just wanted to like chat, you know?
Well, in addition to athletes and sports franchises, I mean, your writing has been embraced by Silicon Valley, like these other subcultures that are really steeped in you know, that like fine edge of performance and generally just how to live a more meaningful life and do it in a grounded, strategic, and fundamentally rewarding way.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope so.
So stillness is the evolution of this process.
Yes.
And I say evolution very mindfully. Like I think it really is in certain ways, it's a synthesis of your other books, and it's also, a very natural next chapter. And certainly your most spiritual book.
Yes.
So I'm interested in how you arrived at the decision to tackle this subject matter and why this became your next book.
Yeah, I mean, I think stillness, the idea of stillness, not like I'm not referring to the book, but the idea of that concept of stillness, it struck me as like when you remove ego, stillness emerges. You need stillness to overcome these kinds of obstacles. So it's sort of the glue that went unsaid in the other books. And so I just kept coming back to this idea. And when you look at really great people, whether they're athletes or generals or just like a wise person that you met or your grandfather, what they all seem to have is that I just am because I'm not a still person. I'm like a high energy person. You probably hear it through the microphone. Like I move my arms a lot, I'm like that kind of person. So when I meet someone who's just like, whoa, you're just like operating on a different plane.
Yeah. That like unflappable, calm,
yes.
Groundedness. It almost seems archaic because it is so rare that you now meet somebody of that kind of stature.
Yes. And what's interesting is that basically, and this is what inspired the book, is that like basically any and all of the ancient schools talk about that idea in their own way as the sort of like the end goal of what we're doing.
Yeah. It's a consistent thread that you'll find in every philosophy and every religion fundamentally, which is something that you explore.
Like Stoicism and Epicureanism are supposed to be opposite philosophies. And yet like Stoics talk about apatheia and the Epicureans talk about ataraxia.
Yeah, I wrote down all those words.
And I can only pronounce a few of them myself.
Aslama, Hishtavut.
Yes.
Samatvam.
I just went through all of them to record the audiobook. But I was just in those two, it's like, wait, these are opposite philosophies. They have the same idea in basically very similar words. You're just like, whoa, how does that... and then you realize, oh, that's just what we're all working towards. Everybody is trying... Everyone wants to be calmer and more in control and less like heart beating out of their chest at the whim of their emotions or insecurities. And that we need it not only at like the personal level, but also... we know that's where our best like professional work comes from. And so I was just fascinated with that. And it's also something I have no natural inclination towards.
Right.
So I also try to write for what I'm reaching towards. I wasn't writing ego is the enemy because I don't have an ego. It's like the opposite of that.
And again, you make this conscious decision to not really inject your own personal narrative into the narrative of the book. I mean, you have the epilogue at the end where you tell a little story, but other than that, you really remove yourself from it. Yeah, my editor disagrees, but my regret on ego is that it be like that I'm even in that book. I would rather not be in either. Yeah, I don't want to be in there at all. What is that? I don't know. I think there's a certain timelessness that comes with removing. Like it becomes a text that will withstand the test of time perhaps a little bit better if you take your own. That's what I think. I think it helped the book in the short term. And then every year that goes by, it feels a little weirder. Even because that's not where I am. Like it feels like it dates it to where I was when I was writing it, which I get. And I've heard wonderful things from people who appreciate that. But I don't know. The book, to me, I did write the books, but I almost could read them and enjoy them because I feel like what I'm doing is channeling and explaining other people and other people's ideas primarily, and I'm just arranging them. And they're all things that are part and parcel of what it means to be a human struggling. So no matter how far down you are this path or where you are in your evolution, we all stumble, and it's always going to be relevant to be able to go back to something that you're struggling and find a passage in one of your books that's going to be apropos. Yeah, and that was another thing. You asked me, how do you prevent this stuff from going to your head? I've realized too, like every once in a while, like actually this happened when I was at Cleveland, like one of the coaches showed me his copy of of Ego.
And it was literally like 100% underlined. Like he'd gone through it multiple times, 100% underlined, almost every page, folded. And there's a moment where I go, oh, wow, I can't believe I did that. Like, and I was like, because I read books and I do that to books, and here's someone doing it back to me. And then I realized that's actually the same fact. This book is an accumulation of all the things that I underlined in other books. So of course it's filled with underlines. It's not like he's underlining these brilliant original sentences for me. He's underlining the quote that I had underlined in another book and then built my book around. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, your role, you're very clear in your writing, and it makes, these ideas, which are difficult to grapple with, very digestible, but you're almost beyond the actual prose, like you're curating a way for people to emotionally connect with these truths by choosing which stories best illustrate them and trying to find stories that also will withstand the test of time.
Yeah, and like I think some people think like there's actually a note I get from my editor sometimes where she's like, people don't know who this is. And I'm like, what do you mean? I'm referring to them by their first name or something because like I'm so familiar with that work. I just like assume like everyone's heard this story like 30 times.
Yeah. Well, this goes back to my theory. I don't know if I've actually told you this.
Okay.
My theory, my Ryan Holiday theory is that you were born out of time.
Yes.
You should have been born, like, you're a guy who should have been storming the beaches at Normandy.
Well, I'm glad that didn't happen. I'm glad I didn't have to.
But you have the sensibility of like the great generation. You know what I mean? You're very interested in history, and you're fascinated by things that like my grandfather was, that are increasingly rare for somebody of your age, which makes you like kind of pleasantly anachronistic.
Yeah, almost, sure. Do you know Jordan Harbinger?
Yes.
So, I'm going to pull. I know I'm delaying, but so he.
That's all right.
This is like how you. This is also how you get cut down to size, which is always good. So I was telling him about the book or something, and he. This is what he said. Let me find it. It was so good. He said. I was like, hey, do you want me to send you the new book? And he's like, oh, I think I heard about it. He's like, is that the book that includes famous historical personalities and how they applied Stoic principles to hard times or something like that? And I was like, and he was like being nice, but I was like, oh, like, was that just like a super sick burn of like summarizing like my entire career? Because that's like all my books. You just described, like, is that the one where you tell stories about famous people filled with lots of quotes from other famous people? And I was like, yeah, you're right. That's what I do.
But in this book, going back to the evolution, like you can't tackle stillness without dipping your toe in Eastern philosophy, right? So this is like your first venture in that direction.
That was all new for me.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in the Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap in how these ideas are synergistic. But what I found interesting is that most books that would tackle this subject matter are they're going to fall into two categories. They're either going to be new age books about how to meditate or about mindfulness from that kind of perspective, or they're going to be very science oriented, like the neurology, the neurology, what's like steeped in all the studies that prove that you should be meditating and all of that. And you really stayed clear of both of those worlds. And I'm wondering whether you felt compelled at times to bring in like what, Matthew Walker has to say about sleep, or, what these, studies are showing about what happens in our brains when we can be still.
Totally. It was a weird thing. So you have Dan Harris's book, Meditation for Fidgety Skeptics. And I love him. I think he's great. But like, even that, it's like, even though you're saying it's for fidgety skeptics, it's for people like you or me, I think most people are like, nope. You know what I mean? Like,
I don't even know. Does the word meditation even appear once in this book? It
appears in passing, but on purpose, I never say you should meditate. Right. One, because I don't. I just can't do it. But I've
you'd rather tell a story about Churchill and how he likes to go on long walks.
Yes. but my point is like, I think people are like, I hear that Eastern stuff is really great, but every time I hear about it, they're like telling me to meditate, and I can't meditate. I don't meditate. This is what I think most people think. So like that's off the table for me. And I think what I try to do in the book is there's a whole bunch of really great stuff from the Eastern people that you can benefit for well before you have to like just sit quietly with your own thoughts or no thoughts.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like, I think like the truth is we live in the West. And so I think one of the reasons that the Eastern stuff doesn't work for people is that it seems like it's for a totally different world. And so what I wanted to do is go like, how can I apply the Eastern insights in a Western like format? So it's like we learn by stories. We tend to learn by personality. Like, I think one of the reasons the Eastern stuff is intimidating to people, and to me too, is like, I've never heard of any of these names. So I don't know, like when someone hears Marcus Aurelius, they're like, oh, that's that cool guy from the movie Gladiator. Like, he was the emperor. I want to be king. You know, like, and then you hear a thing about Confucius, and you're like, what was that? It was like some wandering guy, like in a robe. Should I listen to him? Like, and so I wanted to take the insights, but then, which is what I did with Stoicism in the first two books. So I want to take these ideas and then illustrate them with stories of people that most people want to be like. So you get the essence of the lesson rather than going like, oh, I'm supposed to abandon the idea of having a self. I'm supposed to get rid of all my possessions because some name I can't pronounce, you know, said it was a good idea. And then like people who wear yoga pants talk about it a lot, you know, like,
I get it. No, I get it. But one of the things you succeeded at is making this ancient philosophy, Stoicism, like cool, like people are all about it. Like it's groovy to be a Stoic. And somebody, maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody else, needs to do the same for some of these archetypes from the Eastern traditions, because I think with the right storytelling, somebody could very easily accomplish that.
Yeah.
I think we get caught up in the language and these people we don't know and the kind of asceticism of it all. And it just becomes unrelatable. But if you actually read the Bhagavad Gita, like
it's
talk
awesome.
about warriors, these guys are like total badasses, and what they're doing, the stories are insane.
Yeah. We think, oh, the Odyssey is cool. Like Odysseus, he's a badass. He's like a warrior. He's fighting. He's doing all this stuff. The Bhagavad Gita is basically the same poem.
Yeah.
You know, it's the same, it's teaching the same lessons, but it seems like I assume there's probably a certain amount of racism where we think it's like soft and for pansies, and it's like, we think one is like a poem, but the Odyssey is a cool story. And that's because we've seen like a bunch of movies, and there's other stuff about one and not about the other. So I was trying to make them accessible.
Right. Well, in terms of the launching off kind of point for the book, you know, contextually right now we're in a culture in which, you know, we've never been more starved of our ability to be still. Like we're in this crazy attention deficit era of unprecedented proportions. I mean, you talk about the CNN effect, but you know, we're in the CNN effect on steroids. Like it's way crazier than just news being on television 24 hours a day. And it's become increasingly more and more difficult to put the phone down and spend, you know, 1 minute with ourselves.
Sure.
And we tend to think of this as, you know, a modern epidemic. And I thought it was really cool that you open the book with this story of Seneca and you realize like, oh, this isn't like, this has been going on forever. Like this guy had the exact same problem that I had this morning.
Yes. Yeah, and actually, I'd written the book without that. I started with the Lincoln story. That's originally where the book was going to open. There's a story about Lincoln saying there's this city that's a key, and that the Civil War can't be won without the key. And so it's like, oh, that's the title of the book. Stillness is the key. That's what it's going to be around. And I sent an early draft of it to Robert Greene, and he was like, I really like it, but I feel like you have to like root it in where we are right now, which is amazing advice. And he was like, isn't there this letter from Seneca where he's like in Rome and he's like describing exactly how noisy and loud it is, and it sounds exactly like a modern city. And I was like, yeah, I think there is. Let me go look for that. And I found it, and I was like, exactly. I was probably in a hotel room when I found it. It's noisy. I got a bunch of and Seneca he's writing to his friend, and he's like, it's so loud outside my window that I wish I was deaf. You know, and he's staying above a gym basically, and he's like, these people are dropping weights, and there's people splashing in the pool. There was a guy getting arrested downstairs. Like you're just like it sounded like a summer afternoon in New York City,
right?
When you just want to blow your brains out because it's so loud.
Yeah,
and he's like, but I'm trying to work, and he describes that stoic state, that apatheia, where like that equanimity, where you manage to tune it all out and you kind of go into that flow state and you do what you have to do. And that's what stillness is to me. Stillness isn't like the monk who renounces all his possessions and of course is still, because he's on a 10-year meditation retreat in a beautiful, Buddhist monastery in the mountains. It's like, oh, you can get this anywhere. And in fact, it's harder to get in real life, but that's where it's most valuable.
Yeah, the mastery is in taking it into the world. And when you're somebody like Seneca or a Fortune 500 executive or a quarterback, you're shouldering tremendous responsibility and pressure, and there's a lot of external stimuli that's vying for your attention. And the mastery is in trying to figure out what's important and what's not, and being able to focus on what is key, actually, in moving you forward on the trajectory that you're here to do.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's why the people who can do it either produce this sort of stunning things that take our breath away or get paid all the money, because like no one else can do it. It's really hard.
And it was refreshing to hear Seneca sort of struggling with this, grappling with it in real time.
Yes.
Because we think of him as somebody who has mastered these.
Well, what I liked about
skills.
Seneca's stories, it's not just, hey, this guy has some ability to tune out the noise. Because what if you're sensitive to noise? It's like also his personal life is collapsing.
Everything's falling apart.
Everything's so. He's also going. Like you're saying, there are all these outside noises, but oftentimes the noise is in your head. It's you or it's in you've got some spiritual malady that's causing. And so it's that he's able to do it on all the fronts at the same time. And clear it and get, and I don't think stillness is this. I think the other things, people think stillness is maybe that idea of nirvana, like you get there and then you're there. I think it's like, can you get it for 20 minutes? Mm-hmm. And what can you do in the 20 minutes that you have? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's like, to talk about football, it's like the stillness that New England has down being down 28-3 in the Super Bowl, and just stringing together 4 or 5 drives in 12 minutes to pull off this thing, maybe the high watermark of the entire game. And then you go back to regular life and you dream about getting back there sometime. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You just have these moments where it all comes together. And I think the book and what I've been thinking a lot about is like, how do you build a life? How do you build habits? How do you build systems? How do you build a practice that lets you get there every once in a while? Because when you do, it's just magical, and that's where all the good stuff comes from. Yeah,
there's gentle reminders throughout the book that these people weren't born this way, and for most of their lives, they weren't this way. We tend to look at somebody who exudes those qualities and just think like, wow, it'd be cool to be like that person, but I have no idea how to do that. That's the way they are. But you're saying, you're kind of nudging people towards this realization that no, this is very accessible. Yeah. It may be fleeting. It's a practice.
Well, so I tell the story in the book of Kennedy and the Cuban Missile Crisis, and there's sort of no one, I think, who embodies what we're talking about more than Kennedy, in the sense that he got there and yet also was the opposite of there all the time. And then also, when I think about writing that chapter, you and I went for a run in Malibu, almost exactly a year ago, as I just read all the stuff and I was trying to put it together, and you and I were talking on a run, and I would say a good chunk of that chapter came together from us doing some sort of physical activity, talking. That chapter wasn't like that just magically came to me and I got it right the first time. It was just a bunch of different sort of flashes of getting there through different things, and it came together over time, and I shaped it, but it wasn't
a function of willfulness. It was more a function of letting go, which is another big theme in this book, like surrendering and finding the ability to be present so that these ideas can congeal in your mind and present themselves more fully formed.
Yeah. It wasn't like some sprint of genius that I pulled out this chapter. It was like, a lot of quiet time reading, and it was time doing this and time doing that, and time's just sitting there and just putting in the work, and eventually you get there, and hopefully there's some insight that resonates with someone and helps them do something.
A lot of note cards.
A lot of note cards.
What do you do with the note cards when you finished a book?
So they all get scanned in case there's a fire, and then I lose them, and then they're there. It's like that book is the raw material, or that box of cards is the raw material. And I mean, they're all just sort of not displayed, but they're sitting there in my office. And it's actually really good because it's like, oh, I remember what I do when I look at those boxes. Because now I have, for each one of these, each one of my books is like this box, is their own box. It's like, I remember taking that box out of the packaging, and there was nothing. And that's what a book is. A book is filling that in. Yeah.
So there's a tactile element to it.
Yeah, or it's just like it's a manifestation of the process. It's like if you run up a mountain, you're like, I remember being at the bottom of that mountain,
right?
And so it's like I remember when there were 0 note cards, and now there's 2,000 note cards. And so when I'm starting the next book, it's like, oh, okay, it always starts at 0. Put the stuff together, and
I've got enough boxes sitting over there to know that I can do this again.
Yes. And I also, the other thing is the boxes, because I've talked about them, I don't think they make them anymore. The price is like shot way up on Amazon. So I have like 10. So it's almost like in a way, like I can flash forward to the end of my career. Like maybe I'll get to these, but it's just like, that's like my whole life right there.
Yeah. So they're just sort of gently in the back reminding you that there's more books that need to get written.
Or just like if you could go, if I was like, Rich, you'll have 6 more cars in your lifetime and they're parked in this parking lot over here and you'll go through one after another. You're just like, it's just a weird manifestation.
It's kind of, it's a reminder of your mortality too.
And just the ephemerality of all of it.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like, so I'm going to fill these boxes and then... Yeah. Okay.
That'll be my life.
Yeah.
Well, back to Kennedy.
Okay.
He's a great. He encapsulates so much of what this book is about. In that, he demonstrates his ability to be still and navigate the Cuban Missile Crisis with the weight of the planet essentially hanging in the balance, and he gets. Everybody through that experience. But he's also a guy who started out as a dilettante and, has all these family issues.
His dad bought him a Pulitzer Prize, basically.
Yeah, there's all these... He didn't start as this magnificent statesman.
Yeah.
And then later in the book, you kind of revisit him through all his sexcapades.
Yeah.
And you realize, this guy is... Yes, he has this moment where he's able to step up and do this, but he also is very human and flawed in many other ways.
Yeah, it's like during the Cuban Missile Crisis, there's this photo of him, and he's leaning over so you see him from the back. So it's like
that famous
behind
photo.
Me, and he's like standing there like this, and you can tell he's. Just think if I was like, Rich, I need you to come up with a solution to this problem, and if you don't, 60 million people die, probably including you and your family. Just the weight of that, and for him,
and everybody's pushing you to make this one decision that you're not sure is right.
And worse, it's a very satisfyingly primal and justifiable thing that they're asking you to do. Do you know what I mean? They're like, don't get pushed around, and you're like, I don't want to get pushed around. They're telling him to do something that would be very seductive and natural. Like they brought Lyndon Johnson into the room, and Lyndon Johnson, we got to bomb the shit out of Cuba. It's that's just where, and so he resists that, and it's so impressive. And yet, during one of the 13 days, he asks someone on his staff to drive down this girl from a liberal arts college, and then he has sex with her in a White House or in a DC hotel.
Yeah, she was 19.
Yeah, it's gross. It's just super gross. And so it's not just gross because it's like a man basically preying on a small, the most powerful man in the world, like using his power to, manipulate a young girl. But it's like for all he knew, this could be like his last night on the planet, and he's not at home.
This is the choice that he's making.
Yeah, he's not with Jacqueline and the kids. You know, it's like, I just, when I read that, I was like, what were they doing? Did he tell them? Like, did they know? And he was just pretending he was at work? Did not even care? It just made me feel very sad.
So how do you reconcile like this great moment where he's able to, you know, make a decision that changes the trajectory of history with, you know, the foibles of his personal life?
So that's like a criticism I've gotten with my books. My answer is like, I don't reconcile them. Like people will go like, oh, you know, Ryan, you know, virtue is the highest aim in Stoicism, and yet in, you know, The Obstacles of the Way, you're telling a story about Erwin Rommel, who was, you know, a Nazi general, or Samuel Zemurray, who's like this basically robber baron who, you know, rapes Central and South America as the CEO of United Fruit. I'm not saying you should be like John Kennedy the person. I'm saying you should be like John Kennedy in the Cuban Missile Crisis, doing this one thing, in the same way that when you draw an analogy to something, you're not like, or if you say like, oh, this person's fast like a horse, you're not saying like, also, you know, they just like shit uncontrollably all over. Like it's not a complete analogy or metaphor. It's the capturing the essence of this one thing in isolation. The idea of the book is like, here's a bunch of people doing the right thing in the right moment. Can you as a person put them together? Like, can you put the goodness of Kennedy here and the goodness of so-and-so here and the goodness of so-and-so here, and avoid the trap that Tiger Woods fell in, or you know, so the idea is like, can you grab a collection of all of the virtues of these people and avoid the vices that either them or other people fell prey to, and come up with like a new combination?
Yeah. Well, I think it was a good and important choice to show that, you know, the rounded humanity of these people, because if you only show the good thing, then you are opening yourself up to that kind of criticism. And we're in a culture right now where, you know, we're judging everybody on their worst actions and deciding that they need to be erased from the record forever.
Yeah. And look, one of the reasons I liked Tiger, I learned this from Robert Greene, is like, you don't just show people observing the laws or like what you're trying to say. You also show the costs or the downsides of violating them.
Right.
Like in the 48 Laws of Power, it's observance of the law, transgression of the law. Like you're showing both. And so someone like a Tiger Woods was someone who had this intense mental discipline, but had a spiritual bankruptcy. And the idea is that if you only have one and not the other, it gets you pretty far, but eventually it all collapses under the weight of its own hypocrisy or contradictions. The Tiger Woods episode in the book, that's probably the example you spend the most time on, the most number of pages on. And I think it requires that because there's so many chapters to that to really understand it. But you go into it, if I'm not mistaken, it's in the spirit section, right? Yes.
You divide the book up into basically like mind, body, spirit.
Right.
I think the spirit section could also be entitled Daddy Issues.
Yes, of course.
Pretty much all these people have like huge issues with their dads.
Sometimes it's a mommy issue, but it's mostly dads.
Mostly dad, with these guys.
It Kurt Vonnegut is like, our mom and dad, they screw us up, or something like, it's like they try, but it's all their fault. Right.
And there were certain aspects of Tiger's story that I didn't know how intense that was with his dad.
Oh yeah. I think, and this was a different media environment than we live in now, but I think we all sort of bought into this myth that like, oh, Tiger Woods just had like one of those hard driving like show parents. And it's like, Tiger Woods' dad may have been a psychopath. It's like Tiger Woods' father was deeply abusive, was like Michael Jackson's father level bad. You know, even that we go like, oh, you know, Michael Jackson's dad was bad. It's like, no, Michael Jackson was like a horribly abused victim of a monster, essentially. Yeah.
And it produced this great champion, but then we all saw, you know, the wreckage ultimately that was manifested by that.
It created a very fragile champion.
Right. And then we have the great comeback also.
Which is not in the galley. It's fixed in
right.
the
Yeah,
I
I noticed that because I have the galley, and I'm reading it, and I was like, oh, I wonder if he's going to get to 2009. And you kind of mentioned 2009, but you don't go into detail on it. So in the final book, there's more.
Well, I captured the downfall, and then it was nice to see him winning that major, and the first thing he does is hug his son at the end of it.
Yeah.
So actually, in the galley, it's a little bit more depressing because it's like a story with no redemption, and I do like that he redeemed himself. So I think it was missing a 5% change that it was able to dial. I mean, it's great that he won. I think people are now willing to gloss over just how dark and bad it was, which is, We do the same thing with Steve Jobs. We go, he came back from getting fired from Apple. It's like, yeah, he was horrible. He should have been fired from Apple. And probably on paper, it was crazy to bring him back. Mm-hmm. The Tiger Woods story is very dark and, yes, very driven by daddy issues.
Yeah. Well, from a very top level, the book really, when you are trying to drive the reader towards this understanding of what it means to be still and the importance of stillness, it strikes me as really this journey to learn to turn inward and really crowd out the externalities. It's the externalities that create the confusion and the stress and the anxiety and the competitive nature and the measuring and all of those things that prevent us from being clear on what it is that is ultimately driving us.
I think that's true, but I think maybe that's something that Eastern philosophy people misread in it. They go like, oh, okay, like I got to eliminate noises. I got to eliminate distraction. I got to live a quieter life, blah, blah, blah. It's like Tiger Woods had like a monk-like obsession with golf, but was so broken spiritually that it wasn't like noise in Tiger Woods' ear that was making him unhappy. It was the voice inside of his head. You know what I mean? And so I think you can fix it's. I'm trying to say you got to attack it from all angles. Uh-huh. Like if you have mental discipline, but then you have this deep insecurity inside you that's gonna never feel like you're enough. In a way, almost your mental discipline is your worst enemy because it's just gonna be. You think like, oh, if I win a Super Bowl, I will be happy, or right. Dad will love me if I become a billionaire. Mm-hmm. And actually,
you have the Michael Jordan example of that famous speech that he gave.
Yeah. And then also, it's like you have those things, but you eat terribly and you don't take care of yourself physically and you have bad habits. It all feeds it. There's no like one magical thing you do when you have stillness. It's this like process of getting there.
Right. So if you're very mentally sound and disciplined, but you don't take care of yourself physically, or you have like you have all kinds of crazy emotional problems, synergistically, this is not going to work. It might work towards a short-term goal, but as a life.
Yes, exactly.
You need to look at all of these things.
Yeah, so it's like, your concentration helps you become a great artist. But what's motivating you to become a great artist? It's the sense that, if you're famous, now you matter. Uh-huh. Or that if you get accepted by this cool crowd, now you'll feel good about yourself, But then it begs the question of, who are you without those things, right? Like you talk about Kenzo, the archer, and this idea of like letting go of hitting the bullseye, being detached, like holding on to things loosely, and then trying to figure out how you square that with, well, if I want to be a champion, like I've got to be, my eyes have to be on the prize. Like I've got to be driven in some respect. And it's this balance of those two things. Yeah. Billie Jean King, the tennis coach, she was saying is like, so what makes you a great athlete is your relentless desire for improvement and never being satisfied with the current state of your performance. The irony is that that is obviously the attitude you need to become the best. Mm-hmm. But it is also antithetical to enjoying
your life, right?
To not only enjoying being the best, but to even acknowledge that you got to the top and you are the best. You know what I mean?
Right.
Because you're focusing on how much left you have to do, or how bad you feel after that. Like you're just never going to feel good because you have this quirk in your brain that makes you always focus on what's wrong. And, like it's when I wanted to be a writer, like it would have been like, oh, I could have a book that's making it. And then quickly your mind's like, oh, well, actually, like, what if it was a bestseller? What if it sold 1 million copies? Or what if you had a whole bunch of books? Or, what if you won this award? Or what if, like the idea that even one, like if you told me at the opposite, or the outset of, say, obstacle, that one person in professional sports would have read the book, I would have been like, done. That's success. I'll settle for that. I accept your offer. That's it. But then you're like, well, why hasn't so-and-so read it? Or,
And there's that other guy over there that sold more books.
Totally. And on the one hand, that's good. That can, one, keep you humble. Like I once asked Stephen Pressfield, I was like, wow, what's it like to sell like 1 million books? And he was like, Unbroken has sold like 10 million copies. And I was like, that is like a good attitude because like you're not like sitting and look how awesome I am. I know some of those people are like, they're very quick to tell you how many copies they sold as if it says something. And so it keeps you humble, it keeps you hungry. But at the same time, how grateful, it also deprives you of being grateful for what you've done.
Yeah.
And that gratitude and appreciation you've earned. But you're depriving yourself of it.
Yeah. So the solution lies in falling in love with process, really.
I think so, yes.
I mean, you talk about the word is enough. It comes up in the book a lot.
Yeah, Tiger Woods' dad called it the E word.
Yeah, the E word that like Tiger and his dad could never utter out loud. That leaves him incredibly unhappy as a human being. But then you bring up the example of Heller, who writes this amazing book and then goes on to continue to write books and kind of lets it go and is happy with his circumstances and yet still very productive.
Yeah. Yeah. So Joseph Heller is at a party with Kurt Vonnegut at the house of this billionaire, and Vonnegut's like sort of needling him, and he's like, hey, you wrote Catch-22, but this guy made more money than you will ever make in your life, like at work this week, right. And Heller goes, but I have something he'll never have. And he says, what's that? And he says, the notion that I have enough. Mm-hmm. And I think we are all deep down very scared that if we ever say that word, that's the moment we become complacent and the guy behind us passes us. And in a way, it is. Like if you're running a race and you're like, oh, this is fast enough, like that's when you get passed. So there is that element of it. But at the same time, like, so you're not allowed to be happy with the fact that you wrote one generational defining, like, classic novel that helped millions of people and defined, what that experience was for a whole, again, a whole generation. And like my favorite thing from Heller is this reporter goes like, you've never written anything as good as Catch-22 again. And he says, who has, right? So like he is sad. I like that. That's just great. Like, maybe I won't ever write a book as good as Ego or Obstacle. Maybe they won't sell as many copies. Like, but that's not going to prevent me from continuing to write. I don't think, I don't want it to, and I don't want, what I want to do is love the process. Like I want to love sitting down, starting the next one.
Right. And part of what drives the process is understanding that there's a destination. Like it's this tension between these two that I think, look, these are the questions that go back, eons that we struggled with, like competitiveness versus letting go. And you talk about like, the no mind and being totally present and in the moment. And how do you reconcile that with deep thinking?
Yes.
And how do you square being a very competitive person with these ideas about letting go and surrender? And like, I have my own personal stories with this, I've introduced to these ideas in sobriety. I'm like, surrender, like give up, let go. Like, no, that's not who I am at all. And yet when you really can grok what that means and implement those truths into your life, you realize that your life becomes much larger and it flourishes. And you don't have to, that fear of like, well, this is who I am, this story that I tell myself about who I am, I'm driven by these, what you learn later are really character flaws, character defects that flame out quickly and, end up, causing more damage than good. Yeah.
And I think the East and West sort of align on this. I think it's Confucius, but so he tells one student to do, he's like, you gotta like, avoid your parents. And then he tells this other student, like, you gotta go figure out how to love your parents or something. Like, I forget what it is. And this other student's like, but you just told them to do opposite things. And he was like, one student needs X and the other needs Y. And I think what I like about Eastern philosophy that I think Western philosophy is less explicit about is just this sort of like embracing or tolerance for paradox and contradiction and absurdity. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just like
these Zen koans.
Yeah, like they're supposed to be confusing. Right. I think that's what I think Enlightenment is like, oh, this maybe it doesn't really mean anything. Like that it's the idea that there is what one hand clapping is. Maybe it's just like, maybe what Enlightenment is sitting with that a long time and going like, maybe this is a trick question.
Right.
Or something.
Well, with Stoicism, there's an inherent practicality and applicability. Like you can read that and you can immediately implement these things into your life and improve your quality of life. But the Eastern traditions are much more ephemeral, right? And perhaps that's, where it gets frustrating and that's why it's not as cool as Stoicism, because I think it's demanding more of people. Yes. Because you really have to, reckon with these things in a deeper way to really get to the point where you can even understand what they're trying to communicate to you.
Yeah, and Kenzo, who's the archery instructor in the Zen and the Art of Archery, I think he would have these Western students and they were like, show me how to do this. Like, I want to get better at this. And I think part of the reason his instructions were so vague and contradictory and weird was it was a overreaction to that idea that like, this is the 5-step process for becoming a master at archery. You know what I mean? Like,
and becoming a master at anything, really. Yes. Like basically he's saying master yourself before you even think about like what the arrow, where the arrow is going to go. Like you have to become somebody who knows how to be present, who knows how to, remove distractions from their lives, who knows how to focus deeply. Like all of these things are things that you have to devote your entire years and years and years to get good at.
And that's that, I think, a big part of it is just like surrendering to whatever the master is telling you. And that's the hardest thing. Like it's like the student, it's almost like arrogant, like when the student's like, teacher, teach me this, and I think what that sort of Zen Buddhist sort of archetype is like, you don't tell me what to do. I tell you what to do. You know what I mean? Like, it's, I think, and that's where that higher power idea comes in too. It's like, oh wait, like you're not in charge. Like fundamentally accepting that you're not driving the process. The process is driving the process, and you have to submit to that. And I think it's not. I don't sit down and go like, I'm gonna grab a book here from brute strength. It's like, no, I'm gonna open myself up, and I'm gonna follow the steps, and it's going to ensue if I'm patient enough and accepting enough and vulnerable enough.
Yeah, to have an open mind, to be teachable, to be able to get into that, Fred Rogers childlike state where you're able to hear something that might be at odds with the way that you see the world.
Yeah, for sure.
I think the idea of, it was interesting that you brought 12-step into it.
Did I get that right, by the way?
You did. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's tricky to communicate what that's all about. And it took me a really long time to really understand what that was about. But I think you're very accurate in the sense that a lot of people are reticent to go into that community because of their hangups around, the word God and what it means to, accept that there's a higher power. And truthfully, there is no religious strain in it whatsoever. It's just asking you to believe that something is greater than yourself.
Yeah.
And addicts by their nature are control freaks, and they, have strong opinions about how they see the world. And a lot of them are emotionally damaged and have hangups around the church, et cetera. But all it's saying, like, you could be the most anti-religious person of all time. But what I always say to people who are struggling with that is like, listen, you for the life of you, you can't stop drinking, dude. Yeah. So clearly you can't control that. And you go into this group and there's all these people here who figured out how to do it, and they've been doing it for a little while. Like, maybe they know something you don't. Like, they're your higher power.
Yeah,
they can be. You could just look at them and say, this group consciousness has more strength than I do.
Yeah, and I just think it's such an epitome of the addict mind and of our mind as it's like, okay, so you enlist in the army, and the drill sergeant's like, shave your head and make your bed and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, well, none of these things matter. You're like giving them your opinion. Like, this is a 300-year-old institution that's created the greatest fighting force in the history of mankind, that's done all these things. And you, this person who's thought about it for like 8 seconds, who's never done anything in their life, is convinced that you know better.
Right.
And I think I think a huge part of it is just like, it's almost the fact that it's a hard thing to do is what makes it so powerful. And it's like that's the initiation into the fraternity. Like, are you willing to do what we say? I think there's a part of I think that works in that sense. Yeah,
it requires humility. I mean, the analogy in 12-step would be, you walk in and they're like, go make coffee, sweep the floor. Like, here you have a commitment. You have to say hi to every person that walks in the room. And you're like, what does this have to do with not drinking anymore?
Yeah. It's like, don't ask questions, just do it.
And I struggled with that for a long time. And when I was so broken that I just let go of all of that. And I just said, just tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Yeah.
My life changed.
Yes.
And I think a big part of that is just being malleable and teachable.
Yes. No, I think that's true. And
and it's the willingness to ask for help, and also, perhaps even more powerfully, the willingness to accept help.
And look, I'm still an atheist. I can't get my head around the idea that there is a God, particularly like a Christian God. Like, I just have trouble with it. But at the same time, what I struggle with, what at least keeps my mind open, and then what sort of inspired this chapter is like, but basically every person that I admire that's ever lived for almost all of human history, they were able to wrap their head around this. Like, why am I better than them? Why am I smarter than them? I can't, that can't be right. Do you know what I mean?
So where does that leave you?
It leaves me with at least the, like, it definitely makes me go from atheist to agnostic, right? Which I think is a big step, right? Because atheist says, like, I know there's not a God. Agnostic says, I don't fucking know. Right. You know what I mean? So I think it at least gets me there. And then there are moments where I can go, like, this is just all incomprehensible. There must be something. Do you know what I mean? And so it's gotten me closer to the idea of there being a higher power, or at least the idea that, like, I'm very comfortable going, like, I'm not in charge and I'm not choosing really any of this.
Yeah. And so how do you think about that with respect to stillness, like somebody's connection to their form of faith? And
I mean, I find it doesn't strike me as a coincidence that the stillest people are all the ones, and not religious in the fundamentalist sense. Those are probably the most miserable people, and they're probably compensating for the intense doubt and self-loathing that they actually feel. But the people who undergo the Jesus on the cross in this horrible pain, asking for forgiveness for the people who inflicted it on. I mean, that's just like incredible to wrap your head around, or just the sort of the prayer, the person falling to their knees and praying when the world is, the weight of the world is on their shoulder. I just find that to be so beautiful and inspiring. And it's like, how do I get there? And then going, even back to the idea of the gods, just this idea that, like, oh man, there are these things happening that are beyond us, and that we are not the central driving forces of our lives or the universe. I can get there pretty easily. The Stoics had this idea that so the logos, which actually means the way in the Bible, but it predates Christianity. Marcus Aurelius is ideas that we're like a dog tied to a cart. And so like the dog can fight against the cart, dog can lay down and be dragged by the cart, or the dog can run alongside the cart cheerfully. I can get there.
Yeah. Well, the example from the book that springs to mind is the astronaut who looks at Earth when he's orbiting, and extrapolating on that idea. The more you kind of look at the magnitude of the universe, or when you drill down to the tiniest subatomic particles, like stuff gets crazy. Like our brains can't even begin to understand what's happening. And for me, like that's where I can find a healthy place of awe and wonder, and that place of humility also. Like we don't, maybe someday we'll understand this, but maybe not. Maybe it's beyond our mental capacity to fully grasp. And rather than that making me uncomfortable, I actually find comfort in that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I read this book a couple years ago, and it was talking about like basically like the history of like extreme weather, and it was saying that like we basically didn't know what a tornado was until like right around the time of the founding of America, because they don't really have tornadoes that much in Europe, and it's like sort of an American thing. It's like a Midwest thing basically, but like so there would be these reports where it's like all of a sudden like one side of a street was destroyed and not the other side of the street, and you're just like, what? And so when the world was so inexplicable and we had so little science, it was much easier to go like, oh yeah, God did this, right? Like I could imagine, like you hear this terrible sound and you run and you hide, and then you come back and it looks like God just destroyed, smited down the sinners or whatever. It was like so, and this, you go back further to the Greek or ancient idea of the gods. Like when the universe was much harder to explain, it was easier to get there, and so in a way, it's almost a greater challenge, but a more meaningful challenge to seek out that awe and to look at it. And so, I mean, talking about going to space, have you seen like the blue marble photo? Like it's that famous iconic photo of Earth from space. It's like that photo was taken in like 1971. Like that's like 50 years ago. For the first time, we saw Earth from not Earth. And so when I think about that, I go like, wow, that's like, that gets me a little bit of that humility and awe, to look at that photo.
But it's so fleeting.
Yes.
You think like that is such a magnificent thing that should just permanently alter our perception, of who we are and our importance and all of that. But it evaporates almost immediately, and we're back to our phones and our daily lives. Yes. And, the example that beautifully illustrated that in the book is Abramovich's art installation at MoMA, where for like 79 days straight, she stares at people all day long. Like, walk us through that.
So everyone should watch the documentary "The Artist Is Present" because it's incredible. I think it's on Netflix. But basically, so she's doing this retrospective at MoMA of her entire career, and she's a famous, creative but provocative performance artist. And the exhibit is called "The Artist Is Present," and because that's what she is. She's present in her work. So she comes up with the idea of like, I'm going to be present for every day of the exhibition. And she gets a table not like this, and they sit there, and a line of people, one after another, gets like 5 minutes to just sit across from her. And she just sits there and stares at them in the face. She doesn't go to the bathroom. She doesn't get up. She goes home every night. But like
an 8-hour shift?
Basically an 8-hour shift, immobile in a chair. And the only thing she gets is between people. She looks down, gathers herself, and then looks up.
She gets to go to the bathroom?
No.
For 8 hours, she doesn't go to the bathroom. And she doesn't eat or anything.
She doesn't eat. She doesn't do anything. It's like inhuman. But they ask her collaborator, it's like her ex-husband, but her former artistic partner, and they like describe to him what she's going to do. And they go, what do you think? And he goes, I have no thoughts, only respect. Which is like kind of like what I think of your Iron Man of Iron Mans. Do you know what I mean? Like it's like so incomprehensibly impressive that you're just like, wow, okay. You know what I mean? Like you're just like, wow. It just, you're like, a human did that.
Well, I think with her, like when I read that in the book, like, no, I have no thoughts, just respect. I was also thinking like, she has no thoughts either, only respect. Like for that process. She shows up and sits across from another human being and is fully 100% present for that experience. And there's nothing more respectful that you can do for another human being than to give them your undivided attention.
And the crazy thing is that, like, even though she's not saying anything, even though none of that is like in the description, like everyone immediately feels it. Like in the documentary, you can watch people, you'd sit down and they would just start weeping because they'd never, I've never experienced that. I mean, maybe I have, but you know what I mean? Like I've never it's probably what people, and I'm not comparing her, but that's probably what people felt being near Jesus. Or it's one of the, like when one of these prophets, and look, sometimes they're mentally ill, that's where they're getting it.
Hugging Amma. Do you know about Amma, the hugging saint?
No.
She's this woman, like this, enlightened, higher consciousness, and she travels the world, and wherever she goes, thousands of people show up and wait in line just to,
Sure.
And she gives everybody a hug. I've had that experience too. And it's like, whether she's enlightened or not is neither here nor there. It's just somebody who is so present for that kind of experience is a rare thing.
Yeah. And then we know that, and yet we live our lives the exact opposite of that.
Right. And so I feel like the artistic, the installation is this twofold thing. Like one, to provide people with a glimpse of what that can be like, that experience, but also to underscore and illustrate the ephemerality of the whole thing, because everyone just immediately goes back to, it lapses immediately, or all the bad behavior that gets manifested in people jockeying for position in line. And
well, this one woman, she gets up there and she takes her dress off. And it was clear like she decided not to wear underwear. So like she'd planned out, like, so you can track, Marina is completely present. And meanwhile, this woman spent weeks planning and executing a stunt. And who knows what her intention was. I don't think she was like, I just want attention. But it was like she was the opposite of Marina. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that she was calculating and thinking about the and that's to me what we are most of the time.
And so but I think that's the real statement.
Yes.
In the art in her performance, right? Is to demonstrate that this is what we do as human beings.
Yes. And that even, what does it say, that presence for 5 minutes is a life-changing, it's like a ride at Disneyland. Do you know what I mean? It's like, oh, everyone's got to go on Splash Mountain one time. Everyone's got to go see Mount Rushmore. Everyone's got to see the Mona Lisa. It's not, even though any of us could get it ourselves at any moment.
Right.
We want to pay to see it at a museum and then wait in line and
try to distract the person and throw them off. Like our goal is to just ruin it and destroy it.
Yeah. It's like I wanted to, scribble on the Mona Lisa instead of just take it in.
Right.
Or I got to take like this is a little like smart. I think this is 2010. So it's not, you see people in the audience using flip phones, which I know the smartphone's definitely invented, but they had not consumed the world.
Selfie culture hadn't completely.
Yeah. I don't know if Instagram might not have existed yet, but the point is like, it wasn't quite like, hey, let me show you that I did this. But a lot of people were there clearly to just get it off their bucket list.
Mm-hmm. Wild.
Yeah.
So her being this, pillar of presence, somebody who's able to root themselves in the now and this experience of no mind, let's butt that up against the importance or value of deep thinking.
Okay.
And how those two things kind of contradict, but also can live complementarily.
Well, so I was actually talking to, I don't think it's a problem to say that. So I was talking to Sean McVay this morning, who's the coach of the Rams. And it was, so on the one hand, you want to be present, you want to go with the flow, you want to do all that stuff. And then he was upset about something that he'd seen at practice, right? And I watched him sit there in his office work himself out of acting on that anger. Do you know what I mean? Like he was like, I didn't like how we practiced today. I'm disappointed in the team. We're better than this. But instead of, he canceled, I think I can say this. He canceled the team meeting that they were about to have because he didn't want to go in there and unload on everyone. Because it would have made him feel better, but it wouldn't have solved the problem, right? And he didn't have a handle on what had caused the problem and what the solution was yet. And so it's this balance of like, yeah, let's be where your feet are, go with the flow, let go, don't suppress your emotions. And yet also objectively, we know a large portion of our emotions are harmful and destructive and, short term. And what you need is the ability to like zoom out, see yourself from a distance, extrapolate out into the future and go, what will happen if I do X? Like Kennedy in the Cuban Missile Crisis is totally present, and yet at the same time working out the decision tree of if I do X, they will do Y, and then I will do this, and where will that lead us?
Yeah.
So that's what I mean, where it's like, that's not a contradiction, that's just fucking life. Life is complicated, and sometimes the situation calls for A, and sometimes it calls for the opposite of A.
Yeah. I mean, the master in that situation would be detached emotionally from what was transpiring in front of him and would be present enough to have clarity on what the next best decision or action would be to take, and would be able to fluidly implement that in the moment, and would not have canceled the meeting because that person would have been able to comport themselves and communicate in a way where it could culminate in a productive result.
Yeah, although I don't know if I'd say like that he's somehow short of mastery. I think it's more he's like, I know where I am right now, and I know where I'm going to end up after I work through this. So I'm going to give, so Kennedy in the Cuban Missile Crisis, he has this expression, he says, I want to use time as a tool, not as a couch. And what he means by that is like, I'm not going to sit back and just do nothing. I'm going to give myself time and space so I can use it. And what Sean was doing is going, if I react now, it will be out of anger or frustration. But if I can think through this and come to a solution, I can not only solve this problem, but I can also model to my players like the importance of not being ripped around by your passion. He's like, how can I get mad at a player who, objecting to a bad call from a ref, gets a flag and sends us back 10 yards, and then turn around and do that in practice?
So the distinction that I see in that is he had the self-awareness to realize that he was not going to be responding productively, but that he was going to be reacting emotionally, right? And that self-awareness was such that he was able to put the brakes on his original plan and not make that mistake.
Yes.
I guess what I'm saying is the master wouldn't have even had to go through that calculus because they would be in a place of, they would have the capacity to respond. And I think the distinction with JFK is he needed to buy that time for himself, but he also realized it would be productive for Khrushchev because he knew that Khrushchev over time would come to a healthier realization about what the next best thing would be.
Well, and so two things. Actually, that was something I talked to Sean about, and it was like, one of the things he was frustrated with was how the players had stepped up, that none of the players had stepped up in practice and solved the situation, and that he didn't feel like he didn't want to be the coach that fixes everything. This is what you want a great leader on the field to do. And so the idea that he would jump all over them and tell them exactly what the problem was and not give them time to fix it themselves was actually only compounding the exact problem he was hoping.
Yeah, I get it.
You know what I mean? It's like my problem is nobody stepped up on the field in the moment and was like the leader and said, come on, guys, let's do this, right? And he's like, but what if they do it in the hall on the way to breakfast this morning? It's not as fast as I want, but it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get it.
And so I think that's really important. And yeah, that is what Kennedy was doing in the missile crisis. He's like, I don't think Khrushchev thought this all the way through. And if I give him some space, he'll come to his senses. I'm not going to let him walk all over me, but I'll let him figure this out. And I'm not going to make it worse. I'm not going to back him. I'm not going to put him in a position where he can't do that. And I would guess someone like, I mean, Sean has only been a head coach for a few years. He's already one of the most sort of ascendant, promising coaches of an entire generation. I mean, he's my age and he coached a team to the Super Bowl. It's incredible.
Yeah.
But I would imagine him in 15 or 20 years when he's seen this 15 times, that's when you become the master, right. And you go exactly what you said. You're just like so intuitive, you can't even explain how you knew exactly what to do in that moment. And yeah, it's probably a thing you get.
So when you're there and you're observing this, do you say something? Like, are you just watching?
It's both. I mean, on the one hand, like I'm just a student of all these things. So I love just being a fly on the wall and I'm learning, and I love seeing. It's easy for me to talk about these things, philosophy. It's even easy for me to read a bunch of books on the Cuban Missile Crisis, but I'm never going to be in the Situation Room when that's happening.
Yeah.
So I'm always, one of the reasons I say yes to speaking things, or I even, I have my company that works with authors and brands, is that like it's putting me in a position to just see stuff that I can then translate into my writing. And then, yeah, people ask for my advice and I offer it. I don't know how helpful it is, but I just love, to me, like I learn a lot when I go, like I'm talking to them about stuff, which is stuff I know about, but I really am there to see stuff I don't know about.
Yeah. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this distinction between presence and thought, in the sense that we have Eastern traditions that talk about, this idea of no mind, like focus on the breath. Like the idea is to, really try to broaden those moments where your consciousness is not invaded by narrative.
Yeah.
Right. And that provides the space and the calmness and the stillness for inspiration, for correct action, for all of these things, versus what would be more of in the tradition of the Coens, like let's grapple with these, the mental gymnastics of a very difficult problem to train our brains to learn how to take these right actions.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's this one sort of Stoic. He's almost more of a cynic, but he's just sort of Stoic. His name's Aristo, and he's this early Stoic. He's sort of a contrarian, and he was like, the wise man doesn't think, simply pops into his head what the right thing to do is. And that sounds like a very Eastern thing. I just don't know if that's true. Uh-huh. And I know from my experience that maybe it's a mix of both, right? It's like I'm thinking very deeply about a writing problem that I have, or cracking the code on this Kennedy chapter or any of the chapters in the book. And then I'm working on it and I make some progress. Like I get words down, I get in an order, and then I go for a run or a swim later in the afternoon, and then the real solution pops in my head. Yeah. And I don't know if you can have one without the other.
I think it is both. Like Kennedy has to game theory every possible outcome and do these decision trees to figure out like what could possibly happen with anything that he does. But fundamentally also these decisions need to be a function of a well-honed intuition. And that's really developed through being able to be present with yourself.
And he goes swimming during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah. He writes a letter to
Swimming's a big thing with a lot of people.
I think so. He's obsessed with water. I mean, he's a guy that grew up on the water,
Uh-huh.
But he writes a letter to the gardener from the White House, like thanking her because she helped.
The Rose Garden was a big deal.
Yeah. And I think, look, it's like if
Mr. Rogers went swimming, which I did not know.
Oh, it's beautiful. Yeah. It's beautiful. I want to go to the Pittsburgh Athletic Club where he swam. I just want to be in that space. But have you seen the previews for the Tom Hanks movie?
I saw the trailer, yeah.
He swims in it.
Yeah.
But I think from reading Eastern philosophy, and maybe, look, there's parts that are missing from Stoicism that maybe they explain in length in other texts that were lost. But it's like you almost get the sense from like Buddha or something. It's like, oh, so you're telling me I can solve like complex math theorems by just like sitting there and it pops into my head? Like that's not true. But, and I know you had Cal on, I think it's both. It's like working very intensely, eliminating distractions, doing the work, and then the solution pops in your head in the shower.
Yeah.
I think you need both.
How have you taken what you've learned from the process of writing this book? Like how have you made changes in your own life? Like, what is it that you're struggling with the most where this has been helpful?
So like today was a good example, and I didn't do a good job of it, but it's like I had two podcasts. I had this and another podcast. I had thing in the morning, and then I had to drive here from Orange County, and I had to check into my Airbnb in time, and I have this email that has to go out, and I need my wife to like proof it, and then I wanted to get a run in, and like all of a sudden I'm like stressed out of my mind. I got like all these things, and they all have to go right in the right order. And I was like writing in my journal, I was like, I don't want to feel flustered today, and I don't want to be short with people because none of this matters. Do you know what I mean? Like, even like it was hard for me to text you to say like, hey, could I come 30 minutes later? And because like my instinct is like, I'll just white knuckle this. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
I got that, and I was like, yes, no.
But my thing is like, I'll just squeeze it all in. I'll just fucking squeeze it all in. And so that's part of letting go too. It's like this is all an illusion in my mind. Like the pressure, nobody is actually saying, like, I even scheduled, like I picked this. It's not even like, I'm not even like some actor where it's like the publicist put me on this tour, but just realizing how much of the pressure I put on myself and how many times I force myself into situations that are going to make the end state that I want very unlikely. So that's been a big one, eliminating the amount of time I spend on devices, eliminating the inputs that really make me unhappy has been or that challenge my stillness has been a big one. Having kids has probably been the primary. I guess my thinking would have been like having kids will be chaotic and stressful and difficult, and so I'll have less. Yeah. But it's actually been the exact opposite because there's such a good reminder of like what you could actually be anytime if you choose to be.
Yeah. And what's really important, I mean, you talk about relationships in the book, and any hard driving type A personality is prone to, fantasies of what their life would be like if all people went away and we could just do what we do and there'd be no obstacles or anybody else vying for our attention or our time. And, that's one of the great illusions, I think. And as messy and as difficult and time consuming as relationships are, you pointed out very point blank in the book, like, yeah, but then there's no value in anything that you're doing.
Yeah. Like there's this quote from Philip Roth that I found. He'd been married for a long time. Apparently, it was like a horrible marriage because a woman wrote like this nasty memoir about it. But he was saying, he was like, now that I'm single, he's like, all I have to focus on is my work. He's like, it's like there's always an emergency and I'm the patient or something like that. Uh-huh. And I was like, that sounds horrible. Like the fact, like what my life would be if I was 100% in charge of it and it was all about me would be sometimes you think that's the fantasy. You go like, oh, that guy's single. He goes where he wants. He does whatever he wants, and then you realize like that fantasy is actually a fucking nightmare, especially when you go through difficult stuff. It might be nice, on a Tuesday, beautiful, you do whatever you want. You go for a 2-hour run instead of going like, I got to be back here in 45 minutes or whatever. But what about when you get a cancer diagnosis, or what if when you find out your book got rejected, or, like the relationships are there for the hard times.
And also, if you're in the right relationships with the right people, these things float your boat. I mean, this is like an accelerator to everything that you imagine for your life.
Well, I've been saying that too. Like, I think the generation before, maybe the couple generations before, that experienced so much pressure to have kids. Like, you have to have kids. You have to have them by this time. A woman's job is to have kids. Did a really good job making it clear that, like, having kids is hard and that you can't really have it all. And there's a lot of sacrifices and it takes a lot out of you and all this stuff. And I think in the process kind of underplayed like what you get in the trade. Mm-hmm. Do you know what I mean? And that like, it's like who was it? There's some author and he was talking about how he's a great writer, like a very famous writer. And he was saying that someone came up to him and said, don't have kids. Every kid you have is a book you'll never write. And he was like, that haunted me. And he's like, now here I am, like writing this, I'm looking out at my like 3 sons. And I'm like, I'll take that trade any day of the week. Yeah. Like, what? None of these books matter.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, none of these books matter. None of the work we do matters, really. Like it matters, but it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And the idea that like you're not going to have kids, or you don't have time to get married or be in a serious relationship with someone because like the startup you're making is so important. It's just laughable if you look at it with any kind of distance.
The kind of flip reaction to that though is, oh, well, it's easy for you to say because you're successful, right? And
what do you
it's
mean?
In the sense that, oh, you can say that, this success isn't all it's cracked up to be because you're secure,
sure,
in your trajectory. And I think there's a delusion that we may intellectually understand that, and yet we feel like it doesn't apply to us.
Sure. Although, like, when I think about it, I go, like, I should have had kids earlier. Like, I don't go, like, now I'm successful.
This goes back to my theory that you were born out of time.
Yeah. No, I just think, I get that. And look, like, I also have help. People are like, how do you balance it all? And it's like, I pay someone to help watch my kids. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like and my wife doesn't have to go to an office every day because we have our own business. Yeah. Like I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that I get what they're saying. They go, it's easy for you to say you have it. At the same time, because I have it, I can tell you that, you think that writing a best-selling book or having a lot of money will make you feel good and that you'll feel whole. And that's the big lie that we all believe. Yeah. And that it's like the only moments where I really feel good, like my walk in the morning with my son, that's what wholeness feels like. Hearing my book hit number 1, it feels nice for like 8 seconds, but it that's a biological adaptation where we go, hey, if we cross that ocean, if we kill those people and take what's theirs, then we'll be happy. Then I'll feel good about myself.
The unabated craving.
Yes.
That compels us.
And to go to the daddy issues, I think I think for me, it was like, oh, like if I really get successful and this is where my daddy issues is, but it's like if I'm objectively successful and what I do is very impressive, then my parents will give me what they should have given me at birth for being alive.
And how's that going?
It's a constant struggle,
Yeah.
But I mean, one of the nice parts of getting the stuff, it's nice that I got it, but the blessing and the curse of it is you go, nope, still doesn't do it.
Yeah.
It's like, and then it was nice for what it was freeing to go like, all right, and maybe some people don't get this gift, but it's going like, all right, if this doesn't impress these people, nothing will, and I can stop trying. I can stop doing these things to get that.
There's a relief in that. Yeah. Well, one of the tools that you talk about in the book for navigating this, which I love, is this idea of like holding on loosely.
Yeah.
Right. Like not, if you're like a hard charging person and you've got these goals and you're just like, I'm going to make this happen, and you're just full of self-will, chances are like there's going to be problems with you. And the people who can kind of release their grasp on it, hold it a little bit, less tight, be open to, dips and turns along the way, are the people who ultimately end up in a better place.
Yeah, it's like you go to a driving range one time and you get this proven to you pretty quickly. It's like the harder you try to hit a golf ball, not only the less far does it go, but like the worse the shot is. And the idea that that's not true in life, which is much harder than golf, is ridiculous. Yeah.
I was just in Montana a couple days ago for this event. It was like this gathering, a bunch of cool athletes and people were there. And I had an opportunity to do a live podcast with this woman, Gwen Jorgensen, who won the Olympic gold medal in triathlon in the last Olympics and was dominant in her sport for a long time, and now she's making the transition to marathon running, which is super ballsy. Like, it's a great story. But what this holding on loosely thing reminded me, or just made me think about this conversation, was that she started out as a swimmer. She swam at the University of Wisconsin, and she kind of rode the bench. Like, she wasn't that great.
That'd be a bad place to swim.
She was why?
Because it's so cold.
Well, you're indoors. You swim indoors all the time.
But just it's like I'd rather swim in a warm place. Yeah. Like, just the waking up early, going out in the cold, like, better be a swimmer in a place where it doesn't snow, is what I'm saying.
Well, I'm with you on that. But, she grew up as a kid, like, holding on very tightly to this idea that she wanted to be an elite swimmer, an Olympic swimmer, and wrote her goal times on her ceiling and, like, the whole deal, right? And meanwhile, like, every once in a while she'd go out and run, and she was this, like, incredibly gifted runner.
Yeah.
And to the point where people were like, hey, you should really think about, like, running track. And she'd be like, no, I'm a swimmer. Like, she held on so tightly to this idea, this identity that she had crafted about who she was, that she couldn't see this other potential avenue for herself. And I think it short-circuited her. I mean, eventually it was inevitable. She like made the switch to track, and she couldn't even qualify for NC2As in swimming. And, like, within a year, like, being brand new to this sport, she immediately is like, she's like Big Ten champion, and, like, the rest is history. But I wonder, like, had she held a little bit more loosely, perhaps she would have realized that much sooner. Isn't
that Lance Armstrong's story too? He was a triathlete, and then it was like, oh, you're just way better at biking than the other things. Like, and I think it's I love David Epstein's book on range, where you're just like, oh, it's the problem is that they told Tiger Woods he was a golfer and that all of his identity was in being a golfer. Paul Graham has this amazing essay called Keep Your Identity Small. So it's like, if you see yourself as a Republican, it's hard for you to change your mind it's hard for you to see an issue objectively, because you're looking at it from the lens of my identity as a Republican. And you don't want, even though you actually think X, that contradicts your identity as a Republican. So you think about it differently. And he says something like, the more labels you put on yourself, the stupider you are, because now all of a sudden you've limited what your options are.
You've constructed this sense of who you are, this story that you tell.
Yeah, and so I think this ties into the inner child thing too, where it's like, so if your thing is like, I gotta impress mom and dad, and what are the things that impress mom and dad? You've already closed yourself off to all, like, maybe mom and dad respect doctors, but, like, you're actually put here to be a guitar player.
Yeah.
And so how many amazing talents get squandered because, your mom and dad are going to find a way. If your mom and dad have made you being a doctor part and parcel of them loving you, they're going to find a way to not love you even when you're the world's best doctor. You know what I mean? Like, they're going to go like, oh, you work here? Or, or they're going to be like...
That's like a Neil Strauss tweet.
Yeah. But I think it's true. Do you know what I mean? Like, if they're just in the way that we move the goalposts on ourselves, so are they.
Right.
Because that's what we do.
Have you found, what's the biggest, like, have you changed course on any long-held ideas that you've had? Like, have you had changes of heart, or like, wow, I always thought this was this way, and as a result of all this work and research and deep thinking that I've done on these subjects, I'm changing my mind on this?
I mean, I do like changing my mind. I don't know if I have, like, some, like, great example, or, like, I switched from, this to that, but I don't know if I have one. But I think that it is a great question, is like, where do you change your mind? Have you changed your mind recently? I think a big one for me is just, like, going, like, I need to, like, not care less, but, like, I have wrapped a chunk of my identity up around, like, knowing a lot about a lot of things and having interesting opinions about them, and, like, trying to get more comfortable with being like, I've never heard of that. Like, I don't know what's happening there.
Right.
Sure. You're right. You know, like just like,
instead of being the guy who always is like, oh yeah, I read a book about that.
Yeah. Or just like, oh, let me tell you why you're wrong about this. Like, it's like, can I, like, Marcus Aurelius talks, he's like, it's possible to not have an opinion about things. Like you could just not have an opinion. That is possible.
Yeah.
It feels unnatural.
Well, we're in this back to the current culture, like we've calcified our ability to be nimble with ideas, and we're expected to toe a certain line and have an opinion on everything. And I think it entrenches these narratives and it's splitting us apart, and
Sure.
it's eroding the fabric of our culture and our ability to have productive conversations.
Yes. Yeah. No, the radicalization of one side radicalizes the other side, and then it just
there's a lot of energy behind preventing you from changing your mind on anything.
Yeah.
Because the risk of stepping outside of whatever doctrine you're sort of associated with is become suddenly very high.
Right. So it's like what they're trying to do is take away your ability to think about this, and trying to sort of put blinders on you and ratchet up the stakes artificially and make it impossible for us to come to any kind of compromise or solution, or you know what I mean? They're like, you can't have an opinion about this. You can only have this party line.
And to adopt a contrary opinion is to face ostracization.
Yes. Sure.
It goes to, you talk about this in the book too, like the information diet, right? Yeah. I didn't realize Thich Nhat Hanh had spoken about about this.
I think he was actually probably more talking about what you talk about. That I think if I remember that quote correctly, he's talking mostly about food. But it's like, look, if you're putting like poison, basically industrial agriculture in your body, garbage is going to come out, both like literally and figuratively. But I think it's just as true for information. If you are mainlining the constant chattering of manipulative, people who profit from your rage, the idea that like peace and stillness and clarity and compassion and goodness is going to come out of that is delusional.
Yeah, the opportunity cost. I mean, this willingness that you have to not be fully informed all the time. Like there's this compulsion that so many of us have that we need to be up to date on everything all the time and have an opinion, so that if we meet somebody, we can say the right thing or whatever. Yeah. And the truth is, the opportunity cost of that is that you deprive yourself of that ability to think deeply about what's most important. And you have to be willing to be like, no, I hadn't heard about that, or I don't know about that, or I didn't see that, I didn't watch the debate, I didn't see the latest movie, or whatever it is.
Yeah. And it's that feels like you're being, it's like a dereliction of duty, but it's like, actually your duty is to go read a history book and understand where this all fits in. You know what I mean? Your duty is not to follow trivia in real time. There's a humility. I started saying this. It's like, smart people are on that. Like we have our people on that. You know what I mean? They don't necessarily. I am not the savior that's going to ride in and save that issue. Yeah. There are things where I might be able to do that.
You don't need to have an opinion and voice your opinion on everything on Twitter.
Yes. Like, I think the two mass shootings that happened. I mean, this will go later, but like 2 mass shootings. It's like, they don't need me to condemn this. It's objectively wrong. Like, you know what I mean? Like
do you feel that pull though, as somebody with an audience? Like when something like that happens and I open up Twitter and I look at what's going on, I feel like, do I need to say something? And I'm like, I
think the ego is in the, like, I'm going to move the needle on this one. Like, look, if you're,
because you have to square that with like silence is, if you're silent about things that are wrong in our culture, like you're complicit.
Right. But it's like, I'm not silent I'm not talking to my 2-year-old about it, but I'm not going to, if I had a teenager, I wouldn't be silent about it. Do you know what I mean? I would not be silent about it where I have like real impact. So it's an interesting thing because I'll write, I feel like my job is to apply sort of ancient wisdom and history to modern life. So I'll write something. I wrote an email on Monday for Daily Stoic, which is like this email that goes out to people. And I wrote a thing about Marcus Aurelius and Seneca were both 2 real world politicians who dealt with like actual tyrants and murderous dictators, right? And so they were talking about, what it's like to actually be these people. like Seneca was in Nero's court, like worse than Donald Trump by a factor of 100, right? And he's talking about, like what these people are like and what it's like to be them. And so I was writing a thing about how like nobody, like people are like, what should I tell my children about Donald Trump? And they think it's like, these lessons about the specific policies when it really should be about like, it should be like, kid, this is what it's like to be a horrible person. This, like, this is what it does to you. And character matters. And that you don't need to talk to them about the fact that he was, he said you should grab women by the pussy. I mean, you do, in that you teach your kids like what boundaries are and what respect is. But it's more like you don't need to talk to them about the word choice of pussy. You need to talk to them about character, right? And so I send out this email. I think it's very well reasoned. It's deliberately nonpartisan. I'm a center-right person, but then I watch all the people unsubscribe, And my point, they always send me, why did you do this? I love you. I loved your writing. You shouldn't be partisan. And like what I say is like, my job is to say what I think and what's important and what I think the facts support in the context with which I do my work. And what I don't do is think about what the financial repercussions for doing that are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it goes back. I mean, it's a predominant theme in your book, which is basically learning how to hone your instincts and your intuition. And through that process matched with deep thought to, express a cogent, informed opinion that is liberated from the external ramifications of putting that out into the world.
Yeah, like Marx realist line says, just do the right thing, the rest doesn't matter. And so it's like, I thought that was the right thing to write creatively, politically, philosophically. And so if 500 people who I worked very hard to bring into the universe left because of that, like, whatever. Right. Life is way too short to not say what I think, to keep people whose opinions I don't respect, following my work. And life is also too short to be upset by that, or, you know what I mean? And so you say what you say. I don't think I'm not saying it's courage, but it's like your obligation as an artist is to speak truth as you see it. It's not to change the world. Your job is to speak truth. Whether that truth ends up changing the world is one thing, but
yeah, it goes to this idea of virtue not being an abstraction, but an action.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It was interesting to read about how Seneca became a victim of, basically being power hungry under Nero, right?
Yeah.
Like, so despite all of his incredible wisdom, he still couldn't walk that line of virtue to distance himself from this terrible person.
And that's what I think,
because his own fortune was too closely tied to it.
Yeah. And I think, it's like the Stoics over and over, virtue is enough. Virtue is sufficient. What's right is doing the right thing. And here you have this guy making compromises. Probably, I mean, and I've been there because I've worked for people, not nearly as bad as Nero, but I've worked with people that, certainly in retrospect, certainly getting older, but even at the time, you have ethical concerns about. And you're like, but if I don't do this, there's the savior conflicts. If I don't do this, a worse person's going to take this job. And then, so it's like, I got to do this. And then the other is like, but this is my shot.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, when you're young too, it's harder to.
But I think there's a couple Republican senators who read the Daily Stoic, and one of the even weirder than the sports team is like, a couple times they've had me to the Senate dining room to have breakfast and like talk about philosophy, which is just like unreal. They're not people.
You're having your own kind of like Seneca experience.
Well, I wrote a New York Times piece about that because I actually got offered a press secretary position for one of the cabinet members.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I'll send it to you. And I surprised myself by even thinking about it. I mean, this is in late 2016. There's a moment where it seemed a little less crazy than it does now. But anyways, I'm there talking philosophy to these guys, and they pointed. I was like, why aren't people stopping this? Like it seems so obvious. And one of them said, like, see that guy over there? If he hadn't said what he said about Trump, Trump probably would have named him, like, I don't know, head of the CIA or something like that. And so to them, the lesson was like, you know, by criticizing, you're depriving yourself of a position to affect the change you've worked for your whole life, the principles you honestly believe in, or maybe just to stop Trump from doing something stupid, right? But to me, the philosophical, and I think that's what Seneca tells himself working for Nero. If I'm not Nero's tutor, he's not going to have one, right? If I'm not advising him, he'll do even worse things. But the problem is, it's like, do you actually want to be director of the CIA for this administration? Or are you actually doing, like, is that what you worked your whole life to get?
And when you have that position, are you actually going to follow your moral compass, or is there going to be another, you know, compromise that's going to compel you to pull a party line that's at odds with your true nature?
Yeah, and so it's like, so Seneca writes all this stuff about philosophy, and then he ends up having to help Nero justify why he had tried to have his mother assassinated. You're just like, that's how quickly it escalates.
And rationalizing it.
And yeah, like, he only realizes too late what he's got himself into. And he basically what this is where it's really insidious, is Nero is just piling money on top of Seneca. Like, Seneca becomes like the second richest man in Rome. And so obviously that was interesting and fun, and he talks about it philosophically, but you're just like, he at some point Seneca goes like, oh, this is bad. Like, what have I gotten myself into? I got to get out of here. And he goes to Nero and he says, I want out. And it's sort of like a blood in, blood out situation. It's like, you don't get to leave.
Yeah.
What the fuck are you talking about?
Like the mafia.
Yeah. And then Seneca goes, I'll give you all the money back. And Nero says, no. And he's like, I'll let you partially retire. And so Seneca gets that. And then Nero goes, I don't like Seneca anymore. And he executes him, basically. And so that Seneca realizes too little, too late. This is probably when he's writing some of these essays, like the essay that opens the book. I think he realizes, he never comes out and says it, but I think he realizes that it was a Faustian bargain, and then he sold his soul to the devil. And
classic Faustian, like textbook.
Yes,
you know.
Yes.
And then we see this playing out in real time.
Yeah, I mean, like I have so much respect for someone like General Mattis, and it's so admirable that he resigned on principle over. We don't really know what it was, but he basically resigned over principle, and it shocks Trump, right? Like, but at the same time, maybe the real principle is like, no, you know, like how much did the idea that people like James Mattis were going to be in the administration allow other people to rationalize voting for it, supporting it, not, you know, doing some of the things we're doing now earlier, right? So it's like, it's one man's valiant sacrifice is by another definition, complicity.
Yeah. Super interesting.
And these are timeless ethical quandaries.
Right.
You know
what
I mean?
That's why it comes up time and time again. And what is ancient is modern.
Aristotle is Alexander the Great's philosophy instructor. Do you know what I mean? Like, we tend to think that all these things were clean, but like, it's so complicated. Confucius was not just a philosopher. He worked for these princes and kings. Like that studying the Eastern stuff, you realize that these people were much more of the world than they seemed. And sometimes they did horrible things. I mean, Buddha had a wife and child that he walked out on. Yeah. Which I found, very hard to square.
And the issues with Leonardo da Vinci and his dad, and how he's just trying to find these benefactors. And it's like, because you don't think of him as a human being.
Yeah. Did you relate to, I've related to him so much.
In many ways.
Yes.
Well, let's talk about the body section. You've pulled this hat trick again, which you've done a number of times, which is essentially you're kind of writing a self-help book without writing a self-help book. You never kind of come out and give any prescriptive advice. I would say this section is the most prescriptive of anything you've ever written. You're kind of like, look, you should journal. Like, look what these other, you list like 20 people in a row, all these amazing people. Like, they journal every day, like go on walks, like, take this time, like
Yeah.
sleep. Like this is back to like practicality.
Yeah. Well, it's because it's hard to go like do this thing with your mind, because that's not how the mind works. But you can go for a walk. Here are the benefits of walking, or you can say like, here are the costs of sleeping. Like I can, even though I wasn't there, if you Ariana Huffington tells a story of like brushing her teeth in the bathroom basically, and passing out, and her cheek hitting the bathtub on the way down and shatter. Like I can hear that noise.
She told that story on the podcast.
It makes me so uncomfortable. Do you know what I mean?
And the solutions are so basic.
Yeah, go to sleep.
Yeah, go to sleep, take a walk. Here's one question I had for you though. When I'm reading the take a walk section and you're naming all these people, I'm like, where's David Sedaris? And then you bring him up in the hobby section, but I'm like, I wanted you to go deeper into his like garbage collection thing, because like that's like weird, and I think obsessive compulsive on his part, because like he can't miss a day, and he goes out and walks like 20 miles and he picks up every piece of garbage in his entire town.
He won like an award from like,
I know the Queen. The Queen gave him like a thing. Like,
I started doing it.
You did?
Yeah.
Oh,
So,
yeah, I have noticed that.
I spend a lot of time on our farm is on this dirt road, and like my neighbors are basically animals. I probably shouldn't say this, but I was like, they're just like, oh, I'm finished with this, I'm going to throw it out the window. And it's not maintained by the city, so like, or the county. So if I don't do it, and it's, I don't know, like it's actually wonderful. Like
you picked up like a mattress the other day or something.
Pick up a mattress. Yeah. But like my son will now, he's 2.5, he'll point out garbage and say like, pick it up. Like, so to me it's meaningful. And I'm already walking, and I don't know. It's like, instead of having a strong opinion about whether restaurants should be allowed to have straws, like, why don't we just pick up trash when we see it?
Yeah.
But I just love, I put it in the hobby section because it's such a weird hobby.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. But the relationship between, I've thought about this a lot. Like, what is the relationship between that practice and his creative inspiration? Because there's something about that, low heart rate, kind of activity that creates space for those little sparks.
I think it's probably better for fiction than nonfiction. Although his stories are sort of a mix of both.
He goes out like all day.
But I just mean like, I think it's about, slowing the mind down, and then these funny things are popping up to you. And then you go, I think my uneducated opinion is that maybe fiction is a little bit more like, you do a lot of that and then you sit down and it pours out. Whereas like, to me, nonfiction it's much more a construction of an argument. So I think it's more, do you know what I'm saying? Yeah,
I see what you're saying, but I don't know if that.
So I think that's why he does it for 6 hours.
Yeah, well, I think there's like a mental tweak there with him. I mean, you could have also put that in the routine section, because that's very much his routine. And
they're all related. The writing is part of my routine. It's what I do before I do X, Y, and Z. And like, again, I think going for a long walk might get you 70% of what meditation gives you, or something. Like, let's say the point of my book is like, okay, meditation is great. And let's say it's everything that we're told that it is, but for some reason we're not doing it. Like the analogy, you know, Ramit Sethi is the personal finance.
I know he is, yeah.
He's like, look, people don't keep budgets. Like, you can write a budget, but you won't keep it. So I'm not going to tell you to do it, but I am going to tell you to like set up these auto transfers in your bank account, and then it takes that out of it. So my point is like, I could tell you to meditate, and I know I should meditate, but I'm not gonna. I'm just knowing myself. So like, I will take a walk, and I'll 80-20 it. You know, I'll get a chunk of it.
The walk takes a lot longer.
It does. It does.
And you're willing to do that, but not meditate.
Yeah.
It's interesting, right?
Yeah. Or swim. I mean, to me, swimming is the best one.
There's something about swimming that's like a pipe cleaner for your mind.
Well, I think it's immersive. My theory is totally immersive. So it has a sensory deprivation component. I think there's something womb-like about swimming that our bodies just respond to on a primal level. No screens. You're looking down, so you're not really seeing anything. I think there's something about cold. Like I get much more out of swimming in a cold pool than like when it's hot. And then there's something about the forcing yourself to do something that at first you don't want to do. Then there's, then the endorphin, it's all of it. Mm-hmm. I think, and I just think there's something magical about water that like all cultures seem to have created fountains. Do you know what I mean? Like there's Roman fountains and there's Buddhist fountains and there are,
So you're drawing like the calming effect of like seeing water move. But that's different from the immersion. Like I would agree with you. There's something that happens in swimming that I don't like. Running is amazing and it serves lots of these similar kind of, agendas, but there's something distinct about swimming that's its own unique thing.
Like Barton Springs, where you and I swim, and Austin, where I like to swim the most when I can, like for like 500 years, dating back at least basically till we did, that was like Indians used to go there. Like we had like Native Americans also saw it as a sacred place. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And would swim in it and use it and be around it. And so it's like every culture has this strange relationship with water. Right. Some spiritual, someone told me it's because we're mostly water.
Maybe that's it.
That there's some, you know what I mean?
You should have put that in the spirit section of the book.
Yeah.
On the routines thing, one of the things that I liked is that, now everybody wants to know everybody's morning routine and the whole, it's like, if I just do exactly what Stanley McChrystal does, then I'm going to, be this person or whatever. And you don't really kind of say it expressly, but the point is more just have one. Like you show all these people, all their routines are wildly different, but they have a routine and they're disciplined about it. And, what serves one person is going to be different from what serves another. And it's about, look, if you can be still enough to then figure out like what is going to be the one for you and then adhere to that. Like you don't need to get up at 4:30 and take a picture of your watch like Jocko Willink. And if you do, more power to you, but that's not for everybody.
Yeah, no, it's like, I think there's a danger in some of those like sort of books about routines because people think that it's like, in the same way they go, 10,000 hours? Okay, just did 1 hour, just did another hour. It's not that. It's like anything becomes sacred if you treat it right and you do it enough, And so it's not about what other people's routines are. It's about yours. And the thing I've learned since having kids and, the fact that I have a pretty rigorous travel schedule for my work is it's like, actually it's routines plural. Like I have a travel routine. I have the day the kids go to daycare routine, the weekend routine. You know what I mean? And the ability to go like, today I'm switching to this routine. So that like there's also an ego. And then maybe this is why people think they can't have relationships is going like, this is what I do every day. You're getting in the way of the routine. I gotta stick with that thing. To me, the ability to go like, sometimes I do this, sometimes I do this, but it's like when it's like if A then B, if B then C, like having different routines I can sort of effortlessly choose based on circumstances. Not only it allows me to be less rigid and less existentially anxious if the conditions are not perfect.
Yeah, because we live in the world and that rigidity is going to create all kinds of anxiety and issues because life has a way of intervening. It's like no matter how well-intentioned you are and how many boundaries you erect to protect whatever routine you have, like stuff happens, man. And if you're going to freak out and your whole life is going to turn upside down because you didn't get to, do the one thing, write in your journal or whatever, then that's at cross purposes with the entire intention behind the whole thing. Yeah,
I'd be constantly trying to get in Russell Westbrook's head and mess up his routine. Do you know what I mean? I'd be like, what could you do to get inside that loop in that guy's head?
Right. Because then it's a house of cards.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to round this out and end it in a minute, but I want to like do that by talking about service, which kind of brings it back to the 12 steps, right?
Yes.
Like
the underrated little known step.
Divinely inspired.
Yeah.
My primary purpose is to stay sober and help another alcoholic. Like my job is to be of service. And the more that I can inject not just in that formal construct, but everything that I do, if I can come from a service perspective and enter situations from a position of what can I contribute and how can I enhance somebody else's life rather than like, what am I going to extract out of this to benefit myself?
Yeah. Sure.
My life goes better, you know? And that's, you know, something that you explore in the book as well. Like how can we be like part of this whole equation of being still is about giving.
Yeah. And one way to think less about yourself is just to like think more about other people. You know what I mean?
Because
it's like
self-obsession is the enemy of stillness, right? And,
yes.
And the path out of self-obsession is to avail yourself to another.
Yes. Did you read the new David Brooks book, The Second Mountain?
No, not yet.
It's really
I've
good.
listened to some interviews with him recently, though, and it's pretty amazing. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I think that it's like, because what happens is you climb the first mountain, which is success, getting what you want, and you realize it's nice, but it's not actually what you want. What you want is connection and to be of value to people and to be a part of a community and to do things that matter, you know? And I think people think you have to do this on this grand scale, but it's, you know, maybe it's just like, no, being like a dad's my number one priority or so. Like, I think just getting out of your own head a little bit, not making your ambition the primary driving force in your life.
Being a little bit more like Fred Rogers.
Yeah. What a human being, right?
Yeah.
Like, maybe you should be a saint. I wonder if 500 years from now, when we have a little distance, that can happen.
It would be cool.
Although I guess he wasn't Catholic, so maybe you can't do that. But
a different kind of saint, perhaps.
Yes.
Certainly
even a secular saint.
Certainly somebody who carried a very high consciousness.
Yes.
I'd never thought about the flashing yellow light.
Yeah.
Explain that a little bit.
Well,
it's pretty cool.
If you watch Mr. Rogers, people remember the singing, they remember the sweatshirt, or the sweater and the shoes and the train. But the first thing that you see when the show starts is actually a flashing yellow traffic light. Not like a yellow light like it's about to turn red. It's the warning, like railroad tracks ahead. Be careful, slow down, hazardous road. And that's like a powerful symbol. And then when you think about what the show is all about slowing down. Right. His tone is
so
slow.
Deliberately slow. Yeah.
Yes. Almost uncomfortably so. And then you realize it's like, because I'm not the audience. The audience is a child who's never heard any of these basic things before. And there's a scene he talks about where he's like, the first time I turned on a television, I didn't know what it was. And there were these people throwing pies at each other. You know, he's like, they were throwing pies at each other. This like magical technology, and we were using it to do that. And I think his point was like, what if we use this to give the world more of what it needs, not more of what it doesn't need? And that was his mission. You know, no one gets into children's well, I guess some people do now, like Nickelodeon or whatever. But no one gets into children's public access television to get rich.
Right.
And that's something I talk to authors about a lot. It's like, if you're like, because people go, I'd like you to write a book with me or write a book for me or market my book. And I go like, what are your goals? What are you trying to do? And they're like, my number one goal is to be a New York Times bestseller. Number one goal is to sell 2 million copies. Whenever I hear a number of copies that people want to sell, I'm like, nope, goodbye.
But no mention of the idea that they want to birth into the world.
Yes, which is problematic in and of itself. But I go like, if your thing is to make money, you already fucked up. Like, this is the worst way to make money. Yeah. Like, this is the worst way. But it's like you're selling something you're selling something to people that they actively don't want, which is reading. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, or that only appeals to like a small fraction of humanity. I'm not saying books don't have enormous impact and haven't changed the world. I mean, clearly I believe that. It's true in my own experience.
But it is such an ego trigger. Like, I wrote a book and that book is in a bookstore, so I must be important.
Yeah, or that I want a 7-figure advance or whatever. Or like, so I gave this talk to some people of the Naval Command last month in DC, and I was talking about this too. I was like, if you're it's like, clearly you didn't choose the Navy to get rich and to be famous. And yet we make decisions. It's like, oh, but this command is more high profile, or, you know, like this one comes with a cooler car, and it's like, so you made a very clear statement, consciously or unconsciously, about your intention and your priority when you chose this thing, you know? So why are, you know, you chose classical music. Why are you mad that you don't have 20 million Instagram followers? You chose a niche. So like, be consistent about it. And your lack of consistency is what's causing your spiritual angst.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to the complexity of being human, right? We're still compelled by those base desires for power, money, status.
Well, and we're comparing ourselves to other people always, which is like, you know, the thief of joy, as Theodore Roosevelt said. But yeah, it's like, oh, okay. Like, I just have to remind myself of that. I'm not saying you can't make money writing books, but clearly that's not what's the most important thing to me. Or I would be writing screenplays, or I'd be writing advertising copy, you know, or, you know, I would not be writing at all, because this is not, I'd be making, you know, I'd be a vlogger. There's so many other things you could do. It's like, I chose writing because actually I didn't choose writing. Writing chose me. That's what I do. That's, you know, and
the other job that would be perfectly suited for you just doesn't exist in our era, which is the idea of the philosopher who is consultant to the leader.
Yes. Yeah, sure.
How do we get back to that?
Yeah. I mean,
we could use a few of those.
Yes. Yeah. It would be relieving. It would be a relief to know there were some even conflicted, hypocritical philosophers in Trump's court, but there are not. You know what I mean? It's the team of vipers instead. But yeah, I do like that. I would like that. That would be cool. Especially because it's like, you know, maximum influence, minimal inconvenience, and an utter lack of accountability. But look, it's like I just remind myself, it's like I write these books because I think I have something to say, and that, look, I write the books about the things that I write, and I think they're important. I'm not, Mark Manson is on a different path and a different calling, and I'm not denigrating his thing at all. I'm just saying, like, we each have a lane, and, you know, look, some people are linebackers and some people are quarterbacks and some people are, you know, distance runners and some are sprinters. Like, there's a biological component, there's a, you know, a training component, there's a personality component, and you go like, this is, the Stoics, you know, the Roman world was very strict in its hierarchy. So, you know, there's downsides to that, which is that, like they said, there's a slave hierarchy. But there was also this comfort in the idea of, like, Marcus Aurelius didn't want to be emperor. Not really. You know, he would have rather been a bookworm. But he's like, that's what happened. Right. And so I have to do my best to do the best at that.
But you as a writer, I mean, you're a living example of somebody who is in love with the process, because you don't churn out books of your caliber year after year. I mean, you come out with a book every year. As soon as you finish, you're into the next one. The note cards are out. And there's nothing harder than writing. It's torturous and it's painful, and you have a practice and a diligence about it because you love doing it. Like, you love the process of grappling with these ideas and trying to put together these thoughts in a cohesive narrative.
Yeah, but so my output is either a sign that it's everything that things are very right, or that things are very wrong. Yeah, like, and I think it's both.
If a year goes by and you don't put a book out, then what does that say about who you are?
Yeah, why can't I enjoy it? Why do I have to, like, writing a book also sucks.
What's your dad going to say?
Well, that's why I'm struggling with it, man. I'm trying to get to the bottom of it.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's leave everyone with a couple just key things about stillness. Like, if someone's listening to this, they're going to pick up the book, they're going to read it, but what are the core concepts that you want somebody to walk away with after reading this book?
Well, first, just this idea that stillness is really important, that stillness is where we feel happiness, where we feel contentment, where our best work comes from, where we make good decisions, where we're at peace. Do you know what I mean? That it's like, we know when we've experienced stillness, it was wonderful, but why is it so rare? And how can we build habits and ideas, habits and practices, and set priorities that make it less of an accident and more of an intentional outcome? I'm not saying it's like, oh, this is good. Like, stillness is good for your work, so go get more stillness. But it's like, why are these wonderful moments so rare?
And it's not about going on a Vipassana meditation retreat or pulling a geographic or doing anything extreme. It's about building habits that create more of these moments in your daily life. Yes,
and having a set of people you admire who have achieved it that you look to. So some of the habits, it's setting a routine. It's being active. It's actively experiencing nature in some way. Oh, one of my favorite exercises from the Stoics is, and the most beautiful lines from the Stoics, it's not Marcus Aurelius describing the Colossus of Rhodes or, the aqueducts or the Colosseum. It's Marcus Aurelius writing about, the way a stalk of grain is bending under its own weight, or, the sound that plucking a grape makes, or, he's talking about the furrowed brow of a lion. And so he would have seen that in like the horrible carnage of the Colosseum. Do you know what I mean? But what he's spotting, he's actively looking for beauty amidst what would have been a violent, disgusting, dark place.
Right.
And so actively doing that, it's not like, oh, look at that pretty sunset. It should be like, look at the lines on this table. Like, how did, finding it in the ordinary.
And that's being present.
Of course.
I think of people that embody this quality as being like a lighthouse, right? Like when somebody who exudes stillness or is a living example of this walks into a room, like you know it, you feel it, and you're like, what is it about that person? Because they're standing in their strength and their power, and they're like a magnet that everyone is drawn to. And I think we're kind of more prone to be chasing attention from other people, like we're running after it, rather than gathering our strength and our resources so that we can stand in it and attract what we want into our life rather than chasing it.
Well, and that's why the cover was really hard to crack on this book. And it's a sun, because I think it radiates out. And I wanted it to be something masculine, because I felt like it's like, you can imagine, so you write this book and they give you all the template covers they want.
The font is going to be like...
But it's like, it's like some stones stacked on top of each other. It's a crystal. It's a stone dropping into some water, or it's like a statue of Buddha. It's like there's like 10 like sort of Zen images, and they all tend to be pretty feminine. Not that there's a problem with that, but I do think it signals to people, to a large percent of the population, that this is not for them. And in fact, it's like them who needs it most.
Right.
And there's a Marcus quote. He's talking more about honesty, but he says, like, you will know the honest and good person because they are like a smelly goat in the room. He's like, you know when they're in the room with you. And I think that's true. Like even if you were in an airport and the Dalai Lama walked in street clothes, I think you would know. Mm-hmm. I think you'd know if you saw Jesus. I think you'd know if you saw... I think if Socrates was at your neighbor's house, you'd feel it.
And who would be a modern, current, living example of that?
I mean, this is a bad one.
Who's like in the world?
This is a bad one because it's political, but I think I could say this even if you despise every one of his policies. But I think Obama has that. I think he was, and he talks about this. He's like, I think it was because my mother was pregnant with me in Hawaii, and she would just sort of sit on the beach and look at the ocean while he was in the womb. Yeah, he was unflappable. And you think about the shit that got thrown at him, it almost makes it more impressive. Even if you hate him, you're like, why did we never get to him?
Yeah.
So I think he's a pretty great example.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think
Thich Nhat Hanh is alive, so he has it. The Dalai Lama has it, but
I'm thinking of people who are like in the culture. I think Sam Harris is a pretty good example of that. As somebody who
Although when he gets into an argument,
yeah, he'll admit,
yeah,
he'll admit when he falls prey to that. But in general, he's able to maintain a level of equanimity under duress.
I think so,
in a way that I think is interesting.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's some athletes that have it in fleeting moments. We see it. But it's one of those things where it's like it when you see it.
Uh-huh.
We don't have
an intangible thing.
Yeah, right. And maybe trying to describe.
And when you're like when you see it, you're like, I want to be near that person.
Yeah, yeah. Or you're walking along the ocean at night, or you walk out on a street after the snow has fallen, and you're the first one. You're just like, this is it, But then we're like the people in watching The Artist Is Present. Then we're like, but that's my phone.
Yeah.
Or, oh, you know what? Like, let's go skiing tomorrow, or I should take a photo of this,
It's tough being human, man.
It is tough. Like my wife, I remember, my wife was like, you want to go in the pool? And I was like, yeah. So we went in the pool, and then I was like, you want to do laps? And she was like, we can just be in the pool. And I was like, but that's hard,
Right. I think that's it in a nutshell, right?
Yes.
Is it not?
Yes.
Cool. Well, let's put a pin in it.
All right, man.
Until next time.
Yeah.
I really do love this book.
Thank you.
You did a great job. I think it's going to help a lot of people. It's quite an accomplishment. I love all your books, but I really think that this is like taking it to a new and exciting place for a lot of people. And I'm excited to see what happens with it. So Stillness is the Key. It comes out September 28th or something?
October 1st.
Oh, October 1st. Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. And if people want to connect with Ryan, the best place to do that, ryanholiday.net. And sign up for your newsletter. You send out monthly reading recommendations. And
yes. Or just Daily Stoic.
DailyStoic.com. DailyStoic.com.
Yes.
Right. Excellent.
Yeah.
And pick up the new book.
Please.
All right, man. Thanks for talking to me. Come back and do it again.
I will.
All right. Peace.